Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Simple Watch Reviews, where I review simple watches in a straightforward way. Today my review of the new Thorn T023, their vintage style Submariner. So here we have the watch, and as you can see I went for like the fully vintaged version of it. So they do it in three different colourways. There's a blue with snowflake hands, there's a black with Mercedes hands, and then there's this brown dial version with Mercedes hands as well. And that brown dial is supposed to kind of mimic what happens to the dials of old watches over time as they age. I think they've done a really nice job with it. The bezel on this one is kind of a greyish silvery green. I have to say, on their website it looked like it was more grey than it actually is, but it's got this nice green tint to it, which I think complements the brown of the dial really, really nicely. All three versions go for, currently on the Thorn website, $169, which is about 125 British pounds. So I think it represents pretty good value for money. There aren't many nice vintage style sub homages out there, and I think this is a pretty decent one with some small caveats which I'll talk about in this video. So in terms of specs then, it's 40mm in diameter, 46.6 on the lug to lug, 20mm lug width, and just over 12mm thick, including this nice domed sapphire crystal. The crystal is really, really nice on this watch. And that crystal does have anti-reflective coating underneath, which does a pretty good job. All stainless steel construction, including the bracelet, which is a kind of rivet style bracelet. I'll talk about the bracelet a bit more in a minute, because that is one of the things I'm less keen about with this watch. It's got a screw down crown, 200 meters of water resistance, and the PT5000 movement inside. And as with the PT5000 in my other Thorn watch, their Explorer homage, I found it's quite stiff to wind, which apparently is a common trait with this movement. It's also quite stiff to screw in when you're screwing in that crown. So that is one slight niggle, I guess, with the watch. The crown is also signed quite nicely with the Thorn logo, and I do think the Thorn logo is decent. It's not too in your face, but it does give the watches a bit of an identity. Right, let's talk about the look of the watch, because that really is what this watch is all about. It's that lovely vintage vibe, and I'll put in some outdoor shots as well so you can see what it looks like out in daylight. It really does catch the light very, very nicely. The green and the brown play together very nicely indeed, as do the gilt hands. It all comes together really, really satisfyingly, and it looks kind of a bit unlike any other watch I've got, so I really appreciate it for that. Right, let's talk about the bracelet then. So you have got drilled lugs here, which is always nice to see, but as I said, the bracelet is a rivet style bracelet. What that means is it's really difficult to resize. So rather than having normal screws, what you've got here is like a tube that goes through the watch with a screw head on one side, and on the other side you've got a tiny little screw that screws into that tube. So it's a bit of a battle to resize this watch. I managed to get it done, but it was, to be honest with you, something of a pain in the arse. I'd like to see them move to an easier style of bracelet in the future, although I do like the look of this one, I have to say. The other thing to note is, whilst the clasp has got 5 levels of micro adjust, because of these rivets, you can only actually use 3 of them. So if you try to use either of these two, you can't, because the rivet gets in the way. So that's something else to note. It doesn't have quite as much micro adjust as it might appear to have. The other thing to note with the bracelet is that it does have a very simple pressed clasp, which is definitely appropriate for the vintage style they're going for, but may not be to everyone's tastes. It's really, really jangly. I've seen some people say they feel like it's a little bit kind of loose in the links between the connections between the links, but it's definitely got more of a jangle to it than I'm used to. I actually kind of like that. I think it has a nice vintage feel to it. It's got solid end links which fit nicely into the case, so that's all good. The other thing to note though is you can see here the case is polished on the sides as you would expect, and brushed on top, and the bracelet is brushed as well, but the brushing doesn't match. The brushing on the case feels much rougher than the brushing on the bracelet, so that's a bit of a shame. I am going to try this on some other straps as well. I've got a Tropic rubber strap I think it'll look good on. I've got some NATOs, I've got some leather straps. I think this is the kind of watch that you could try on a bunch of different straps and it will probably look good on all of them. The The bezel action seems pretty good. It's fairly clicky, as you can hear. There is a little bit of play. It's not horrific, but there's definitely a bit of play there. It's not as tight as the bezels I've got on some of my watches, but it's not too bad. The lume is decent as well, so C3 lume, as you'd expect for this kind of Fotina style, and it really does glow quite nicely. So let's show you it on wrist. I've got a 6¼ inch wrist, and I think it fits me pretty perfectly. The female end links and the relatively short lug to lug mean that it wears very, very comfortably indeed. And the bracelet, whilst it is definitely jangly, is very comfortable once it's on wrist. So those are my thoughts on the Thorn vintage sub. It's definitely not a watch without its flaws, but I think the charm of the vintage style overcomes those, and I'm really enjoying wearing it. Do let me know what you think of it in the comments, and please do consider subscribing for more simple watch reviews.